All right, so thanks everybody for coming today. I'm excited to get to talk about ICS Defender and our new Dynics Cybersecurity Console. Real quick, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Joshua Jacobson. I'm a software engineer at Dynics. I get to work on both products that I'm going to be talking about today, as well as come out into the field with some of you periodically to help work on getting things set up, configured, testing things, all that good stuff. So I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to stop me in the middle if I say anything that seems confusing or that you'd like some clarification on. And with that, I suppose let's get going. So I'd like to start out by going through kind of some of the progress that we've made in the past year on the ICS Defender specifically. And like Jeff said earlier, there is going to be noticeably less this year than we have in past years, simply because we've been focusing on the new Cybersecurity Console and the whole new release of ICS Defender, which Jeff will be talking about later today. That being said, we did have two major feature releases in the past year. So, if you see that little number at the end of the firmware string slowly increasing, that's why. And in the midst of all of that, we did transition to a new hardware platform for our ICS Defenders. And I have some comparison ones to show there in just a minute. In addition, we've had some package updates that aren't falling under the ICS Defender firmware itself, but are primarily related to connecting to our new Dynics Cybersecurity Console. So in addition to all that, we have just a few minor improvements and bug fixes, which I won't spend too much time on because I'd rather get towards some of the more interesting stuff as we have time for it. But first off, some of the hardware changes. On the left here, you can see our old ICS Defender DIN rail mount, which we have had in production for a number of years at this point. And then our new model out on the right that we have just started up within the past year. I, for one, think that it looks much better, but not only is it better aesthetically, it also comes with a faster processor, which means you're going to have less concerns about performance if you were ever getting to a point where that was an issue. And you've got a more opportunity to configure this in whatever way you need it to be. So we have also upgraded our 2U rack mount. This one, if you're unaware, actually has two ICS Defender units inside, which you can configure in a hot failover standby mode. And this way, in the event that one unit goes down, you can still have connectivity to whatever devices are behind this ICS Defender. Going on, we have our IP65 or IP67 rated ICS Defender. This one, again, has both aesthetic changes. I think it looks much nicer. And we have some internal changes to upgrade the hardware, keep it consistent with, as the industry is evolving and all that sort of thing. And we have also some new units or ones that I did not have an old photo of. If you can see here, we've got an ICS Defender with 8 Ethernet ports. So in the event that you are constrained primarily by the number of devices you can get connected to it, this might be a good solution for you. Same thing with our 1U rack mount. This only has a single unit inside, but it's got a ton of ports there. So if you have an issue with port density, one of these two solutions might be something you can take a look at. And we have our new Nano unit, which comes in a slimmer form factor, only has 2 Ethernet ports on the front of it, but is a lot easier to install in tighter spaces and get wherever you need it to be. So that's the ICS Defender family as it sits right now from a hardware side of things. Let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing from the software side to get this more up to date and add features as they've been requested of us. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of our deep packet inspection engine improvements. So if you don't know, DPI is one of the core features of ICS Defender that helps to make it more tailored to the plant floor compared to a more traditional enterprise firewall, right? So we can digest and understand both SIP and Modbus traffic at a packet level, and then we can filter based upon that. So if you want to create rules that say we're allowing SIP traffic, but only to read tags from this PLC. That's something you can do in the ICS Defender. Or if you want to say, we're going to allow someone to read and write this particular set of tags, but not the rest, that's also something we can do. So we've just been putting some minor UI enhancements throughout this whole process. And I can show a couple of them off today, just in the form of some screenshots. So if you can see here, you've got the edit firewall rule page, and right below it, we've got a page where we list out all of our firewall rules. Beforehand, you would have to go in and see, what is my industrial profile name, deep dish. So if I wanted to see what that profile was, I couldn't easily see that from the list. I would know that we're doing some sort of deep packet filtering there, but I couldn't tell what exactly it was. So now we show that when you hover over it, and you can go and easily edit that rule directly from this page as well. So some usability enhancements there and some little back-end optimizations. Specifically, we've done a lot of stuff with Modbus TCP. So we're able to, like I said, digest and understand Modbus traffic, but we've kind of improved our UI here in a way that makes it a little bit more intuitive to configure. And we've improved the processing and detection in the back end as well to go along with that. So if you can see here, we've got the old UI and the new UI both on this slide. And we just kind of switched around some of the terminology that makes it a little bit more intuitive. And then this application functions matching is more connected in that you can just pick from that drop down what function you'd like to filter on, and it's going to pre-populate the protocol number that's associated with that, so we can filter that in the back end. You don't have to know what the exact function code is for reading coils or writing coils or whatever. That can all be pre-populated now. A couple other quick things I'd like to go over when we're still on the topic of ICS Defender. We've changed our licensing model over the past year. No worries to anyone out there. We haven't decreased any of the features on any of the levels. This has just purely been expanding features across all of our different license levels based on changing requirements and how we felt like those features could best be used. So if you see here, it's a lot of adding captive portal across the board, and we add a lot of DHCP and DNS functionality to a couple of our different licenses. If you're curious about what the matrix looks like now, you can see that we have a variety of different licensing packages that can go on any ICS Defender unit, from the Mini or Nano all the way up to the 2U. And then this gives you an idea of the sort of features that come along with that. If you are curious about getting a look for this for yourselves, this is included on every data sheet for each of the ICS Defender models, so feel free to reach out and we can get that to you. Couple little bug fixes I'm going to touch on, just the ones that seem to be relevant and based on feedback from some of you sitting in this room, actually. We have a couple bugs with the dashboarding UI that showed incorrect results for the temperature sensors or the CPU utilization. So in certain systems, those numbers would not be quite accurate. Those should be on point now. So if you see anything odd, please let us know, because we're expecting those to be really solid metrics if you want to capture those at this point. So we also decreased the amount of time sessions would remain active by default, which is some security feedback we received from a customer who said that our default of what I believe was 2 hours initially was kind of too permissive, that if you left your ICS Defender session open on a computer, theoretically someone could come up and reconfigure that just based on the session still being active. So right now it defaults to 5 minutes, and we have a setting in there that you can change that for your own systems based on your own security needs. So in terms of package changes, there's just a couple of things I want to touch on. like I said, most of these are related to our new Dynics Cybersecurity Console. We have a question in the audience.
Yeah, Josh, so with that timeout, as long as you're actively working on the ICS Defender, it won't log you out after 5 minutes, correct? That's 5 minutes of inactivity.
That's correct. Yeah, Jeff's question was, if you are still working on the ICS Defender, is it going to time you out after that 5 minutes? And it's no, it's 5 minutes of inactivity that's going to force you to log back in at that point. So no trouble there. Let's talk about our new API. So we've developed a REST API on the ICS Defender that currently has supports for configuring things like rules, rule sets, and aliases. So kind of all of the core functionality you need to do some filtering across the ICS Defender, add rules, all that good stuff. And we also have some get-only endpoints where you can see interface information about how the ICS Defender is configured and all that sort of thing. Right now, we're using this API internally for the Dynics Cybersecurity Console. When it's able to send rules to your ICS Defenders, this is what it's using internally. But we're working on more functionality for this as we go along, kind of based on what's needed. And this is the API that we're working with some third parties like Centripetal, who's here today to talk about our future plans to integrate their software with the ICS Defender. So this, I would expect to see some considerable traction on in the coming year as we expand this out to work with more partners and be able to support more configurations. The other package that we've had a lot of changes to has been the Dynics Cybersecurity Console package. Pretty obviously, that's the way to connect an ICS Defender to Dynics Cybersecurity Console. But I think the technology behind this is actually really cool. We create an encrypted connection between the ICS Defender and DCC that is a two-way channel. So at any point in time, the ICS Defender can push information up to DCC, or DCC can request or push information down to the ICS Defender. And this setup process could not be simpler. So we have a single file that you export in the DCC console that contains some certificate information, some credentials that allow an ICS Defender to authenticate with DCC for the first time. And then we're going to generate separate certificates and credentials for that connection to happen the remaining times. So every ICS Defender is going to have its own private connection back to DCC. At any point in time, you can revoke a certificate for an ICS Defender and basically make it stop being able to connect. And this adoption file itself is only good for however long you want it to be, 2 hours, 4 hours a day, so that you can go to the Cybersecurity Console, grab this adoption file, go around, adopt all your ICS Defenders, and then know that it will be deactivated. No one can add another ICS Defender without being able to get into the Cybersecurity Console and export another one of these adoption files. So inside of VMware here, if I can get it to load, I've got a couple of different VMs set up. I've got a Dynics Cybersecurity Console VM here that has the Cybersecurity Console running on it as a service. And then I've got 3 ICS Defender VMs for us to test with. So I'm gonna just...
Does the DCC run on other platforms than Windows, or is it just Windows-based?
Yeah, so the question was, does DCC run on other platforms other than Windows, or is it just Windows-based? And the answer is, right now, we only officially support Windows, but there's nothing in the technology that prevents us from running on Linux. We just haven't seen enough demand to make that officially supported yet. So, when you start DCC initially, there's going to be some questions about your license and what the IP address of the server that you're running it on is, and creating an admin user, all that sort of thing. I've skipped those for today's demo because I'd like to really show the core of the functionality here. But other than that, this is a stock installation. Okay, so after I've signed in to the Dynics Cybersecurity Console, I have a whole bunch of different options and menus available to me. But the first thing that we're going to want to do in order to connect an ICS Defender device is go to Devices here and Adopt New Devices. This is the expiration time I was talking about earlier that allows you to just adopt for a particular amount of time, and then you simply pick where those devices are going to be coming in from. They're all on this virtual Ethernet interface, so I'm going to pick that and go ahead and generate that file. That's going to download right down in the corner here, and then I'm free to go to each of my devices and adopt it. So this is my first ICS Defender here, so I'm just going to sign in. With our latest ICS Defender firmware, the DCC package comes pre-installed by default, so you won't have to install anything. All you have to do is just go here, enable the DCC integration, and pick our adoption file. We will then be able to, once it loads for me, hit the save button here. This will go and make a connection in the background to the Dynics Cybersecurity Console, and hopefully it won't time out like that in a live demo. Gotta love it. So let me just try that again. There we go. Live demos, they always get you. So our first ICS Defender has shown up here. I'm going to repeat this process real quick for the next two ICS Defenders. And we will go from there. So once again, that's just under System DCC integration. You just enable it and drop the adoption file in there. This will make the secure connection and all that in the background, and you won't even have to mess with any IP addresses, connection credentials, anything like that.
Hey Josh, I have a question.
Sure.
Is it the same adoption file you're using for each of the defenders?
Yeah, so the question is it the same adoption file I'm using for all of the defenders? And the answer is yes. The adoption file just contains some general information about the Dynics Cybersecurity Console that you're connecting to. When you add that to an ICS Defender, it's going to be able to connect to DCC securely because we've got a certificate in there. And then they're going to exchange some information and be able to create a connection individually. But you don't have to export a file for every ICS Defender you're going to adopt. Just grab one, get it on a USB key, go around and adopt all of your ICS Defenders. So.
Josh?
Yeah.
Can ICS Defender be adopted by more than one DCC?
So currently we only support being adopted by one DCC instance. The question for everyone was if ICS Defender could be controlled by multiple DCC instances. And right now that's something we've considered but haven't put much thought into.
Do you see a use case for that, Ken?
Potentially with having a plant level console and then a corporate level console.
Would you want the corporate level console to be kind of read-only? Because otherwise, if you're managing remotely with your cybersecurity console, you could theoretically be pushing opposing rule sets from each console.
That would be fine.
You can make one just read-only, for status information.
Yeah, one would be read-only, the other one would be managed.
Yeah.
In case one of them server crashes and we need to change from, now I need to go to each and every ICS Defender and all of them are running. So you have two of them running, I can switch the and if one of them goes down, I can switch the other read-only to manage one, so I get time to bring the server back. That's other thing. Because right now, if I have 80 ICS Defenders, I have to do one single IP address. If my source where I'm running my DCC is crashed for some reason, I can just in a new VM where I need to run a new IP address and everything, and you go to each and every ICS Defender and add all of them. So if I have two of them, it will be more flexibility. Like I can make other one as a master.
So that's if the IP address were to change, right?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah, this is some great feedback. We appreciate it. Inside of the Cybersecurity Console here, we can see some information about these ICS defenders. If we want to go take a look, we'll pre-populate some connection info that we've gotten, the IP address, as well as some additional tabs where you can see system information. So all of the stuff that you could normally see on the ICS Defender dashboard is available to take a look at here. You can also see the configuration backups. So by default, this is the last 20 configurations that have been made to this ICS Defender. So anytime you change a rule and hit apply, anytime you are editing a user, it's going to create a backup of that configuration. And then you're able to either download these configurations remotely if you want to just have a copy of that on your laptop, or you can restore that configuration to the ICS Defender. It's going to load that and then reset obviously whatever changes came afterwards. So we've got 2 more tabs here which are active only when you have a package installed. So the first one is assets. So if you have used the asset management package before, we go out on the network, we'll scan for devices, we'll listen for traffic, we'll try and determine what's out there and report that in a nice clean view that shows you all the device IP addresses, MAC addresses, what we think they are, and any other data that we've gathered about them. And same thing here, if you are running an OpenVPN server on this ICS Defender, you can see who is connected to that. So if you want to have a single pane of visibility into a whole bunch of ICS Defenders, what's behind them, and who's connected to them, then the Cybersecurity Console might be something you would be interested in. But let's take a quick turn now and get into some of the meat of the Cybersecurity Console. Let's deploy some rules. So now that we've got our ICS Defenders connected, we can go to this Firewalls tab and go ahead to Rule Sets. We can create a rule set, which is ultimately just any collection of rules. So we're going to call these standard plant rules. And if we go ahead and create that here, we're able to go inside of that and create rules within it. So the first thing I'd like to do is be able to ping these ICS Defenders from the external, the WAN network. So we're going to allow source any here, destination. We're going to say ICS Defender, and then we're going to go ahead and go to the firewall rule, pick the WAN interface, and set the protocol to ICMP. So at this point, we've created a rule that will allow ICMP traffic on the WAN interface of all of the ICS Defenders. So let's go ahead and try and ping one right now. Let's see. I don't know if I can resize this terminal, unfortunately. Is that large enough for you guys there? I'm sorry, that's DCC. So our ping doesn't work, but we created a rule for it. Well, that's because we have a staging process in DCC where we're not immediately pushing those rules out to the ICS Defender. So after having created this rule, what we're going to do is go to a collection and create these. These are going to be arbitrary groupings of ICS Defenders and rule sets. So, at any point in time, you can say this ICS Defender has these rule sets, or these ICS Defenders have this rule set, and you can mix and match these when you go to deploy them too. So you can say, we're going to have this ICS Defender in these 3 different collections, which means it's getting all of these different rule sets. So you have a lot of control over how you want rules to be deployed to those ICS Defenders. So I'm just going to call this the standard collection, and we will throw all 3 ICS Defenders into that collection. So from this side here, I'm going to throw all 3 ICS Defenders and deploy this. We're just going to pick the standard collection for now, and this is going to schedule the deployment for all 3 ICS Defenders. You can see they quickly get scheduled, then they go to deploying, and then they go to deployed. No notifications about licensing, so Thank goodness there. But now if I go to this ICS Defender and refresh the firewall rules page, we can see that we've got a rule set with these remotely managed standard plant rules right here. And this is the IPv4 TCP allow all that I had earlier. So let's, for example, turn that into a ping rule by going to firewalls, rule sets, into the rule set, and editing the firewall rule. So all that we're going to change here is we're going to say that the protocol is ICMP and the destination is the ICS Defender. We'll save that. Once again, it's not updated in the ICS Defender yet because we've basically just staged this change. We haven't deployed it yet. So we can go to deployments, go ahead and deploy standard collection right there. So in just a minute, these should refresh like they just did. And then just like that, I can go back to my ICS Defender, and this is now an ICMP rule. And so hopefully that means that I will be able to do 192.168.3.132, which is the IP address of the ICS Defender, and we are live with that. So thanks. Yeah. So it is really. It is really that fast to be able to deploy to 3 ICS Defenders, but that scales out to however many you've got running. You know, we'll deploy those rule sets in literally moments and have your ICS Defenders back up and running with that. The other thing I wanted to just show real quick is that you can have multiple rule sets deployed to a device. So I'm going to go to firewall rule sets.
Do an alias.
Okay. Just 2. We'll add a rule set there. And if we go to aliases, we can add a host alias, and then we'll just say this is named Google and create it. And inside of there, we will add the Google DNS servers. So 8.8.8.8, if I can type.
Yeah.
That's the same thing I always use.
Was that?
The IP address goes to the second line. The first
Okay.
I do that every time. Just tells me we need to retake that dial.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got an alias created in here with the Google DNS servers. And so then inside of my rule set, test 2, I'm going to add a rule that says any can talk to destination single host or alias. I can just put the alias in here, and I'm going to use DNS port, and I'm going to switch the protocol to UDP. So this rule should effectively let any device below these ICS Defenders talk DNS, which is UDP port 53, up to Google. Yeah.
Can you use FQVNs instead of IPs?
Yes, you can. So you can either type host name here, or you can actually add that in the alias itself as the value. So if we go ahead and save this one here, that will be in that rule set. And what I'm going to do is slightly alter this configuration here. And so I'm going to say, instead of deploying that one to all of the ICS Defenders, I'm just going to add that test2 rule set to this collection, which is just tied to one of my ICS Defenders. So ideally in this configuration, I'll get the standard rules on all of them, and then I'll get this test2 DNS rule on just one of the ICS Defenders. So if we go ahead and deploy here both collections, we should see that these are going through. Once again, it just takes a quick moment. And then this one is not the one that I picked to have the DNS rule, so we see that it doesn't. And if I can get the Teams layout to go away, I can get over to this, maybe, ICS Defender. and log back into it here. And we should be able to see that firewall rules. We've got both rule sets set up inside of there.
In your rule order there, is it process local first, then you're remotely managed, or can you interchange those in your rule order?
Yeah, so by default, any local rules are going to be lower priority than the remotely managed rules. Obviously, because you have local control over where they are, you can edit this. But when we deploy, we're going to put all of the local rules below. The one up here that's the anti-lockout rule is a bit of a special exception. Normally, that's on the LAN interface if you have one, and that's just always at the top no matter what. That's our way of making sure that you can't lock yourself out of an ICS Defender with firewall rules and not be able to manage it anymore.
Can you reorder your remotely managed rules?
Yeah, so that's a feature we're working on. We'd love some feedback there in terms of how you would expect that process to happen, because we've got rule sets and rules both in DCC. And is it going to be something where you'd want to see a global, this rule set should take priority over this rule set, or should it be like specific to ICS Defenders and say, I want to be able to sort the order here, however? Both. Great. Okay.
What happens if you deploy one collection at a time?
So if you deploy one collection at a time, it's just going to send the rules from that collection. So when you do a deployment, you have to pick all of the collections that you want to have deployed. And by leaving some out, you're effectively just saying that that collection is disabled. No, unfortunately, that the order is set up. Yeah. So.
One of the things we are going to change. What is your question?
So is it possible to have conflicting rules within your rule sets? And if so, how are they handled?
Yes. So the question was, is it possible to have conflicting rule sets within, or conflicting rules in your rule sets, and how are they handled? And you can end up with conflicting rules in your rule sets. It's just like the ICS Defender will let you create whatever rules you want to. And then those are just evaluated in process order on the ICS Defender. So the first one to match wins. So if I've got a rule right here that says allow all ICMP traffic, and then several lines later, I've got a rule that says block ICMP from this particular IP address, it's still going to be allowed because the first one matched and let it through. So,
Which makes the ability to be able to change those orders important.
yeah, agreed.
So you could do that by alphabetical ordering
Your rule
rules
sets.
that you're creating today, knowing that that's how they're going to be
Right.
organized on the.
Yeah. So if you wanted to, start the important ones off with like an underscore first or something like that, so it comes before the rest of them, or have a.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
Can you flip back over to the DCC, Josh?
Mhm.
So the way that works today is when we are creating rules in the ICS in the DCC, we're evaluating certain pieces of those rules at the point of creation. And then really at this page, it doesn't do anything but deploy. What we're going to do is add, and it's actually in the short term, is we're going to actually parse the rule sets here that are going to be deployed. Look for any issues like that rejected issue, which should be caught before we attempt to deploy it, and flag it, and let you click it and go solve the problem if you created something incorrectly or something goofy. And then the other thing we want to do is be able to look at the rules that you're deploying and then maybe suggest some changes. Like, I realize that you have allow all ICMP here, but you're blocking ICMP here. Are you sure you want to do that? Does that make sense? The guy can say, I want to do it, or he can say cancel and it'll fix it. So it's kind of a pre-process.
Yeah, for clarity there's two parts to that solution. The first part that we're working on, and that is going to be relatively trivial to implement, is just basic validation. Does this ICS Defender have an interface that this rule is assigned to? And other simple format questions to make sure your deployments don't get rejected. The more advanced piece of that we got a lot of cool stuff and great ideas for is going to be that IntelliSense of what is this rule going to match? And if rules later are also going to match that sort of thing, do these rules conflict? Which is a little bit more of a difficult problem to solve, but we're excited to be able to try it. So.
And it's only software.
Can I back up the DCC?
Yeah.
To the GUI or what?
Oh,
Because I need a bunch of rule sets now, right?
right.
How do I back up them and how I can export that and import back that to a new installation?
Yeah, so right now we store all the DCC data in a SQLite database on the server. So the way to do that right now is to just back up that file, and you would be able to restore that. If it's something that you'd be interested in doing through the GUI, that's probably not very difficult for us to add.
If I need to upgrade the existing version, like right now you're at 0.3, I guess. So if you upgrade the new version, I have rule sets which is different than the older version. If you give an option for me to upgrade it, I need to completely uninstall and install a new version. How does that work?
Yeah, yep. So we use an MSI, like Windows installer package. And assuming there are no breaking changes, which we're going to avoid between major releases, you will be able to just run the new installer. It'll keep your existing database file and just updates the server itself. So it should continue to run it even if you have existing rule sets and stuff in the database. You don't have to uninstall and reinstall and all that. If we do make breaking changes, we're going to do our best to have some sort of migration script or something that you can run to update your database to be compatible with the new version so that you don't have to lose any rule sets and things that are configured there.
Josh, is there any ability to do like role-based access on the firewall rules, right? Where, like, let's say I'm an operator, right, where I could go and request a rule, but then it would go into approval state that maybe a supervisor or an admin would have to actually approve it to be able to deploy it from a review perspective?
Yeah, there's nothing in place for that today, but that is an interesting idea. You're thinking in DCC you want...
Yeah, so if I have a plant floor engineer who needs to allow communication from their PLC to a new server, right? That engineer could go and request the rule in DCC, but then whoever is in charge of cybersecurity at that plant maybe has to go and actually approve it as kind of just an audit check to just make sure that engineers maybe aren't opening rules up to the world, but we're also giving them the ability to maybe request the rules and takes the load off other people.
Right. That sounds a lot like a feature that we have in an SDN demo that Jeff might be doing later today.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. So I think that would probably be a pretty great addition to DCC. I'll make a note of that, and we'll see where we can get that in.
Can you make sure to repeat the questions, Josh?
Yeah, sorry.
A question back to when you said disabling during deployment, like you were putting one set of rules for deployment and there was disabling. Can you clarify more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so the question is, how does deploying different collections go? What happens if you're not selecting a collection during the deployment phase? And that's pretty simple to answer here. I can just demo it for you. So let's say, for whatever reason, I think that there's an issue with the test rule set. I don't want that ICS Defender to continue having those rules. I'm just going to deploy the standard collection without the test rule set. That's going to go out to all of those ICS Defenders. And then when we go into this one, where we just had both rule sets, we should be able to refresh the page and log back in and see that we have gone down to just having the standard rules in place there.
The process you just did there was unselecting the test rule set.
Mm-hmm.
So if the guys in here updating the standard rule set that you had created and thinking, well, I need to go update, I'm going to send out my update for all the sites with the standard rule set, and just clicks that, he's going to inadvertently uninstall the test from all places where that's installed.
Yeah,
How do you have some clarity or flag around?
that's a good point. Yeah.
I get what you're doing, but at the same point, it might be, if I think, well, I just updated the standard, I just want to redeploy standard.
And leave test alone, right?
And if I'm just going to leave test alone, but what I'm really doing is uninstalling test.
Right. So you would expect doing this and hitting deploy would just deploy the standard collection.
Just update
Okay.
that alone, so, I don't know, probably something to think about.
Yeah.
You could even put maybe
Right.
some sort of option to clear all of them
Yeah.
and redeploy, or
Yeah. That's absolutely doable. I'm not married to this idea of, having it be which ones you select and all that. So,
The other thing to keep in mind is that's a collection. There might be 15 different rule sets in it. So the collection is not necessarily just around rule sets. It's a collection of anything that DCC can manage, like IAM Defender instances. So if you make changes to IAM Defender instances and you deploy any given collection, it will go out and update all the pieces of that collection.
Yeah, like I said, there was just the mindset of, I just updated one collection out of 15. So I'm thinking I'm just gonna redeploy that one collection and I don't select the other ones, I've just uninstalled the other 14. So that would probably,
If you run multiple collections in a single ICS Defender, yes. If you only have a single collection with multiple rule sets, no. Yeah, from an organizational perspective, if you do that with multiple collections in a single, then that's how it works today.
One feature maybe will be on that note of deploying everything to the collection, right? Is if you could have a selector that says, in this collection, I maybe only want to update Defender, or I only want to update IAM, and be able to just pick and choose which parts of that collection you update maybe.
okay. Yeah. I think that would be a good addition. Maybe some reporting too of like, this is the devices that this is going to go out to so that you can see.
Yeah, or an audit log after the fact, here's everything that I changed.
Mm-hmm.
I think we log all that now, but we just don't display it anymore.
Yeah.
Or even like I don't know how useful it would be, but like a dry run mode, right? That says, here's all the changes that you're intending to push. Do you really want to push them all?
Right.
Yeah, that's that pre-processing idea we're talking about. So it'll go through, and the intent is it pops up a page and says, here's all the ICS defenders we're touching, we're gonna push this and this to this one, that to this one, this to this one. Hey, this looks like there's a problem, right? So you can kind of see it all before it happens, so to speak, and then say, okay, commit those changes.
So we've got the Dynics Cybersecurity Console. So as we've been talking about, it's a central management platform. Create rules and create rule sets and then collections from them, and then be able to deploy them successfully. But the convenient thing about this is that you've got the ability to have a standard set of rules that goes across all of your ICS Defender products, right? So instead of having a new policy come down from IT or a new rule that you've decided to implement, you don't have to go around to every ICS Defender and update the configuration there. You can simply add that in DCC, go ahead and redeploy, and you can have all of your ICS Defenders up and running with the new rule set within 5 minutes. So it's a pretty powerful technology. Rick, go ahead.
Are you able to forward schedule, deploy, or schedule?
Yeah, so we have all the technology in the back end to support forward scheduling deployments, but we don't have that available as an option in the UI yet. I would expect that would be in really soon, actually. Technologically, yes. Practically, not quite yet.
Can you schedule a backup of all of them at some time?
We have access to back up the configurations on ICS Defender at any time in the console, so long as they're connected. You just have to go to the page for that ICS Defender and click the button to do that. We don't have a mechanism to batch back up all of them concurrently. You just have to go to all of them in the console and hit the backup button.
Yeah, some of this I think he'll cover when he talks about the roadmap, and that's going to be
So current features, we support deploying IPv4 rules and aliases. And like I was talking about earlier, we support an arbitrary grouping of ICS Defenders to rule sets. So any sort of configuration that you can dream up between having certain rules assigned to certain defenders can be done in DCC. And like I showed earlier, we have status information provided by the ICS Defender API. So let's talk what our plans for the future are, and I'd be happy to get any feedback I can in terms of where we should be heading next. So two things that are currently under development and should be out in the next DCC release will be importing rules from brownfield ICS defenders. So say you're interested in the cybersecurity console, you think that's great, but you say, I've got, several dozen ICS defenders already deployed at one plant alone. I don't have the ability to redo all of that work, making that ICS defender configuration and building that up in DCC. So we're saying that's not going to be a problem. We're adding the technology through the API to be able to extract the rules from an existing running ICS defender and import that into DCC, and then you can deploy that as is necessary. So in this way, you can go from having a bunch of individually managed ICS defender to DCC owning all of those rules and being able to keep track of them. In addition, because this is really easy functionality, once we have the ICS defender rules import in place, we're going to be able to audit rules. So if you say, this is the set of rules that DCC knows about that should be in this ICS defender, we can actually go and look and validate that both all of your rules that you have specified are in that defender and there's nothing else in there. So those are two pieces that we've got under development right now. And on our roadmap, we've got a whole bunch of different ideas that will be coming in the future. So we're going to allow DCC to quote unquote own ICS defenders, which will mean that there will be no access to locally configure the rules. So once DCC has adopted an ICS defender and pushed rule sets down to it, you can say whether or not you want that ICS defender to be independently configurable or owned by DCC. So prevent access from someone going and manually editing the rules on that ICS defender. So we're also working on adding support for...
Josh, I have a question.
Sure.
Are you going to be able to edit the ICS defender locally if it does not have an active connection to DCC and you log in as an admin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Jeff is wondering if you're able to edit the ICS defender locally if it's not connected to DCC and you're an admin. And the answer is, of course, yes. So if you get your DCC instance disconnected, if it goes down for some reason, or if it's no longer operational, we're going to allow that local access back into the ICS defender so you don't lock yourself out of it, right? So so long as DCC is actively managing that ICS defender, we can lock it down. But in the event that DCC goes away, we will let you back in. So
is there a process for readoption at that point if DCC comes back?
Yeah, so if it's the same DCC server, same IP address, all that, no readoption necessary. ICS Defender will just reach back out and get the connection.
How does it resolve the difference between the rules that is bought owned and now the configurations and customized? How do we resolve that?
It's a good question.
Let me repeat it.
Yeah, so the question was, when an ICS Defender reconnects to DCC after DCC has been away, if there are local changes made to that ICS Defender, which ones are we trusting? Are we going back to what's in DCC, or are we using what has been locally edited in ICS Defender? We're open to feedback on this. If it were up to me, I would say we would probably keep the locally edited rules in the ICS Defender because that's what it's been running with. And that's what it needs, but I would like to see some alerting in DCC to let you know, hey, the audit failed for this ICS Defender. It does not match your current expected rules. So.
And at that point, you should have an option to pick who's the boss.
Mm-hmm. So we're also working on adding support for DPI rules. So right now we've just got our standard packet filtering on IP address, port, protocol, all those sorts of good things. But we're working on adding DPI configuration and support into DCC so that you can deploy DPI rules as well. The third point here I think is really cool. We're working on hosting firmware updates, package information, and all that good stuff on DCC so that when you go to update your ICS Defenders, instead of having to punch a hole into the internet to grab firmware updates from, you'll be able to just grab them directly from DCC. So you have to manage one connection out of your enterprise onto the internet from DCC to our server to get our packages, but you don't have to have 400 for all of the ICS Defenders to be able to reach out. And I think that's a pretty exciting one, especially when you have a lot of ICS Defenders and want to get the latest features.
Gosh, that's an important
Yeah, excited for that one.
Fundamentally, when we have a product, the goal is to never punch multiple holes in your infrastructure. We want to proxy everything through a single point.
Absolutely. The last thing on this slide is adding support for LDAP and Active Directory users in DCC. So you can pretty easily have that connected to your enterprise organizations, all that sort of good stuff. And evidently, with some of the feedback.
Just out of curiosity, this is a roadmap. How long is this road?
Yeah. So this is not the totality of our roadmap. We have a lot of stuff that I did not put on this slide just because I didn't think it was as interesting. But in all, we're looking to continue some of these features within the next few months to year, and then as we get demand for those, obviously our priorities are going to change. So what's most important now could push that up to being sooner than that. And if we end up hearing that no one really cares for having LDAP AD support, that could get pushed down to be farther away than that.
Last 2 points should be the first.
Last two should be the first two.
Yeah.
Vote of hands, last two, first two.
All right. So
the question about the roadmap is twofold. Number one, I have to quit pulling the development team off on some of these things and putting them on other things. Largely, we have a couple of projects that have been customer driven pretty hard right now. So we've been, in fact, aliasing in the cybersecurity console was not slated to be in the initial release of the console because it was actually quite an undertaking for the aliasing piece of it. But we had a large customer engagement where that was critical for that to happen. So we reorganized our roadmap to put aliasing in early. We brought on a couple of new developers, and we have a new cybersecurity engineer starting. So his name is Ethan. You're going to see Ethan probably pretty soon because he'll be the guy in the field, so to speak, when he needs to come out and help with stuff. And everybody else will still be available, but that's really his purpose in life, is to go visit customers and help solve problems or help them come up with solutions to problems using our stuff. And then, like I said, we've got a couple of new developers. So once we get past this customer engagement, let's call it, I'll shift more resources back to the cybersecurity console. Right now we've pretty much got Josh and a half doing cybersecurity console stuff. Most of the team is working on a product we have called Fusion because we have an extremely large deployment coming and they needed specific feature sets. As soon as that's wrapped up, which should be shortly, within weeks, I'll be shifting some resources back to the cybersecurity console because it's an important product for us.